It's a new day on the For You Media Africa. Across the African continent, the drums of Pan-Africanism are beaten louder than ever, from calls for united currency to trade blocs to growing demands for homegrown economic models that truly serve African interests. In a recent address, the Zambian President Hakainde Hichilema urged for Africans, especially African leaders, to promote unity, Pan-Africanism within the continent, pay tribute to African founding fathers, and of course work towards achieving a more prosperous and economic prosperous continent. This call comes as the Zimbabwean president called and affirmed that neocolonialism on the African continent is destroying the continent's economy. What is fueling this renewed push? Is it tied to the decades of external dependence or bold vision for Africa's self-determination? Today, in the course of Talking Point, we shall be unpacking the rising factors for Pan-Africanism and economic reforms. Is Africa finally ready for a real push, a real shift on the African continent? Our panel of experts from across the continent will break it down for us. Stay with us. This is Talking Point. Hello, beautiful people of Africa and the globe. You're welcome to this edition of Talking Point of our For You Media Africa. On this day, on the menu, we discuss the rising call for a renewed Pan-Africanism as well as unity and economic reforms on the African continent, more tributes to founding fathers of Africa. That will be what we shall be discussing this day on this edition of Talking Point. It comes at a time when the Zambian President Hakainde Hichilema, alongside his Zimbabwean counterpart, praised and pushed further amongst other leaders for a renewed push for Africans to be united in the wake of having a more prosperous continent. To unveil our panel of guests this day, I'm first of all be joined by Dr. NJIX LAGOKE in his capacity as a founding member of the Convention for Pan-Africanism and Progress, and he doubles as the Associate Professor of History at the Lincoln University, United States. Greetings, sir.
Morning. Thanks for the opportunity.
It's a pleasure to have you on board, edify our audience with your insightful contribution. Also, we are being joined by Chief MUSI, a traditional ruler and a Pan-Africanist. It's a pleasure to have you, Your Majesty, on board.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sharon, and always a pleasure being on the For You Media to talk about issues across the globe.
Indeed, like you mentioned, Your Majesty, we shall be discussing issues, first of all, that affect Africa. And this day, we'll kickstart the conversation with you, Dr. NJIX. Being that you're a Pan-Africanist as well, and I mentioned while introducing you, what, in your opinion, is fueling this, renewed momentum behind Pan-Africanism in today's political and economic landscape?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. So there is we can have a show just on that question. So I'm going to try and then, I will try not to be too long on that. There are several factors that can explain the renewal of Pan-Africanism. I think the first one is that Africans are fed up. They're tired from the urban African to the rural African, from the leaders who represent the elite to the people who are governed, from those who live on the continent to those who are in the diaspora. There is a sense of tiredness of the white supremacy system, which is expressed or manifested through different names, but it is the same thing, which is about the domination of those who are not white people. In the case of Ivory Coast, for instance. We saw the crisis of Ivory Coast, which lasted for more than 20 years, and we saw the involvement of friends. Our friends tried to break a leader who is not perfect, but who meant to free his country, and I'm talking about Gbagbo Laurent. We saw how NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, went after Gaddafi, and in our eyes, in the age of social media, in broad daylight, they killed Gaddafi under the leadership of Sarkozy in France and Barack Obama in the United States. We saw also, yesterday it was the anniversary of the killing of George Floyd in the United States. And then the Black Lives Matter movement, which was created, to talk about domestic violence or police violence in the United States, was going to become a global movement, and then in different parts of the world. So these are some of the factors that can explain why today Africans and people of African descent are so awakened, and then they're claiming Pan-Africanism. We can add the situation in the Sahel states, when we saw the presence of all those military forces that were claiming, to fight terrorism, and then the terrorists were making some advances in Mali, in Niger, in Burkina Faso. Over there, the leaders and the people were revolted, and they decided this was going to bring to power the officers in Mali, Assimi Goïta, Tchiani in Niger, and then Captain Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso. And then in Senegal, we saw the rise to power of PASTEF, which is a political party created by Ousmane Sonko, the current prime minister. And then his political party claimed Pan-Africanism, and they defeated Macky Sall, the former president, seen as the puppet of neocolonialism. And then the last element I'm going to talk about that can explain the renewal of the regeneration of the Pan-African consciousness are two elements. One, it is the issue of reparations. We can see growing calls for reparations in the diaspora, in the Caribbean, the United States, in Africa, and we saw the creation of the formation of a united front led by the African Union and CARICOM to call for reparations. And then the year 2025 was labeled or named by the African Union the year of reparation. The last element which can explain why Pan-Africanism has become, to quote my friend Maurice Carnet, why Pan-Africanism has become has penetrated pop culture. It is internet, social media, and particularly the artificial intelligence. So this revolution can give the opportunity to people to know immediately when people are doing stuff, to have access to the content of the speeches, or what the stances, or what they say. And then we saw that on April 30th, when there was like a popular mobilization to express solidarity towards the president of Burkina Faso, who was accused by Langley, the African general, and then falsely to take, the gold reserve of his country for his personal security. So these are all those elements that I can, use as factors that are contributing to the growing consciousness of Pan-Africanism. Thank you.
Thank you immensely, Dr. NJIX. That was well elaborate and very extensive. I would like to pinpoint on the last, not the least point you mentioned on the call for reparations. And that leads me to the next question with you, Chief MUSI. Having listened to Dr. NJIX and his extensive approach, to some of the factors that are contributing to this renewed call for Pan-Africanism and other reforms across Africa, we saw the African Union, like he mentioned, it's part of the umbrella approach that is used by CARICOM and the AU in a bid to bring Africans to consciousness. Now, from your perspective, looking at the theme which was selected by the EU, which is justice for Africans and people of African descent, you know, through reparations, I would like to ask you, with this renewed calls for reparations, do you think Africa is truly ready for what is coming in terms of, you know, the reparations from what happened to the continent eons ago?
It's me or for MUSI?
It's for Chief MUSI.
Okay, Chief MUSI.
Sorry, Sharon, I didn't get your question. Can you come back again, please? I had a breakup.
Oh, sorry about that. I was talking that in line with what your co-panelists had stated, in line with the theme that was chosen this year by the African Union to celebrate the Africa Day or African Freedoms Day, if you might call it that way, it was justice for Africans and African descent through reparations. So in that light, Dr. NJIX was stating earlier on that the call for reparations has intensified and attributes or accounts for one of the factors that is pushing for, you know, these growing calls for, say, Pan-Africanism on the African continent. So my question is, do you think Africa is ready for this reparation, or say it has to happen, Africa is ready for what has to come in line with the trauma, the pain that it went through eons ago?
Well, let me first of all thank Dr. GNAKA, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing the name very well, for being on the show for us to talk about Pan-Africanism and to talk about the issues of Africa. I think, Sharon, one thing I must highlight here, which I think it's important for us to pay attention to, is the fact that there is no particular day that is set aside as an African day, for us to celebrate Africa. Africa is supposed to be celebrated every other day, every other minute, and every other second. So we must continuously reason towards this direction and give ourselves Africans the prerogative to understand that we are a continent. And when we talk about celebrating a particular day and looking at what it holds for us as Africans, I think it is important for us to not mention the fact that reparation is not something that we are due as Africans. We actually, we are due that reparation. And the question cannot be for us saying if we are ready for it, but it is our responsibility. It's our need. It's a need for us Africans to be paid back for all the things that happened. Asking about our readiness, we are definitely ready, because the question would have been if the West that colonized Africa, if they are ready to pay back what we would demand.
Exactly.
So I think that's the point. We are always ready as people to receive these proceeds and this reparation. And I think this is the right time we're asking for it, because if you look at the progress, as Dr. GNAKA said, please, you have to pronounce the name after this so I get it very well. But I think if we have to look at what he said, look at African states, continuous military takeovers in different African countries, which is extending to Senegal and other countries. It's just the beginning of the dawn of Pan-Africanism. And I think these are some of the issues we should be looking on the show. And of course, that's the growing call that we are having now. And this can not happen in terms of us being prepared if we don't have strong reforms put in place as Africans to be able to face the new phase of a developed and more united Africa that we envisage.
Exactly. I think it boils down to the system. Now, moving forward with you, Dr. NJIX, I would like to align myself with Chief MUSI, but I have a question. when I listened to the address of the Zimbabwean leader, Emerson Mnangagwa, he stated that Africa needs to be vigilant, you know, in the wake of neocolonialism of Africa, because according to him, it destroys the economy of the African continent. Now, if the African person, he stated, however, that it's constantly threatening to destroy the economic potential of Africa. But from your point of view, do you agree with him? And do you think that Africa's economic potential is under threat, especially with the rise in neocolonialism that is so much still very much existent on the African continent? And what's the way forward?
Yeah, thank you. So, Chief Musi, you say my name right? So my name is NJIX. So, so you're not misspelling my name. That's the first thing. And also, I'm glad to be here with you. I saw what your first response, and then we're going to have a great show. I always like to be in the presence of very smart people, and then it's a privilege to be in your presence. So as I try to answer Sharon's second question, I want to start with what Chief Musi said. I will get back to that in a few. But the first thing people have to do in Africa, yes, neocolonialism is a reality. Kwame Nkrumah wrote a book about it in 1965, neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism. I think that's the title. It was written in 1965. And then the theory of neocolonialism, the process of neocolonialism, the expressions and the manifestations of neocolonialism, Kwame Nkrumah wrote about that in that book. So the reason why I'm saying that is that it is not a new thing. It has been like that, and then maybe one day we can have a special show on that, because when the European knew that the wind of change was too strong, that after the Battle of Bien Dien Phu, 1954, when the French lost it into China, and then later on we saw the beginning of the war, the war of independence in Algeria, November 1st, 1954. Then when they saw that Ghana was on the verge to become the first black country to be independent in Africa, but Ghana became independent in 1957. Then the Europeans decided to design some schemes. The Commonwealth system was already put into place by the British, I think in the 30s already. And then later on, we saw that the French put into place under the leadership of General de Gaulle, the Franco or French African Community, 1958. And later on, we saw a number of treaties that the French, the British, and many other European countries who were colonizers they signed with those African countries. One of them is the presence of military bases on the continent of Africa, on the soil of countries to become independent, or who were already, or who became independent. So now the economic treaties, yes, one of them today, it is called the Samoa Agreement. It used to be called the Cotonou Agreement. That's also one of the systems that the Europeans put into place under the leadership of France in order to control our economy. So there are so many things that, for instance, our mineral resources, our natural resources that are used to be sold on the international market, in the hope that it is going to help us secure some funds to do our development. It has been like that for 60 years or so. And then we cannot transform our cocoa, our coffee, our gold. All those elements explain what people call neocolonialism. It is a reality. Now, I'm going to talk about and something that Chief Musi spoke about. Yes, we are ready for reparation, but we need to see some reforms on the continent of Africa.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then I agree with him. So it is the burden is on those African leaders who are, all of them are talking about reparations, and then all those countries that are at the forefront of Pan-Africanism. And then I'm going to talk about some of those reparations, some of the reforms that need to happen for us to really take advantage of reparation that we are seeking. The first one, we are in the year, this is the 50th anniversary of ECOWAS. And that's something many people have not spoken about. It is the 50th anniversary of ECOWAS, which was created in 1975. What does it mean? Be in the Judeo-Christian tradition, be in the Islamic tradition, there is that concept called Jubilee. Every 50 years, people have to renew the land, and they have to release the prisoners, and they have to think about the regeneration of the nation. So when the African Union talks about the year of reparation, yes, we support the call, but at the same time we think about the year of Jubilee, the 50th anniversary of ECOWAS, and we think that there are some countries that need to take that into account, like in the spirit of internal reforms, in order to set free some prisoners. And there are some countries that need to take the lead for such an action. I'm thinking about Togo, which is organizing the 9th Pan-African Congress, which is pushing for reparations, and Togo should take the responsibility to think about easing up the tensions in the country and releasing some prisoners, because there are some political prisoners in the prisons of Togo. I mentioned Togo. I can talk about many other countries. It is about time for us to look inward to try and see how we can bring down the tensions in our respective countries. That's point number one. Point number two, it is about the education. Be Togo, be Senegal, be Mali, be Niger, all those countries that are at the forefront of the Pan-African struggle, or Burkina Faso, we don't see them. They're doing many good things, but we don't see them changing the curriculum in order for the African people to learn about the real history of colonialism, the real history of the people of African descent, the history of the struggles, be in Africa or in the diaspora. They need to think about creating an anthology or an encyclopedia about the Pan-African struggles since the 15th century to today. And then so that people can learn about Pan-Africanism. They are not doing that. This is a very important element. Third element, it is about thinking about a new paradigm. Be in Mali, be in Senegal, be in Niger, be in Burkina Faso, be in Zambia, be in Zimbabwe. They're talking about the decolonization of the economy, but they're not proposing an endogenous African paradigm around which to think about the decolonization of the economy. This is why people like us, we are thinking and promoting the Ubuntu philosophy as the paradigm, the ideology for a new dispensation of Pan-Africanism, for an integrated development of Africa, for the decolonization of the economy, and also for a cultural revolution on the continent of Africa. So these will be some of the reforms. Of course, Chief MUSI can add many other things on the economical level. Thanks.
Thank you to Dr. NJIX. And just to pick up from there, Chief MUSI, he listened to your co-panelists. And of course, just to align with Dr. NJIX, the Zimbabwean president, like he said, was stating that there is need for Africa to have a better representation at the global political as well as financial architecture. But nonetheless, having listened to some of the points that were outlined by Dr. NJIX, let's look at or assess some of the current Pan-African initiatives we have on the African continent. We have the African Union, we have, you know, the African Continental Free Trade Agreements or area. Do you think that some of these initiatives are really living up to promise, and what should be done to revamp this so they can be able to fulfill the purpose for which they were created on the African continent, in line with the Ubuntu perspective or Ubuntu initiative?
I think there is one point I capture from Dr. Nyaka's presentation, which I would like to highlight a little bit on it. There is this issue of solidarity across Africa. Mm-hmm. We need a very strong solidarity across Africa. There is the issue of Jubilee, which you talked about. You see, in a philosophical point of view, you will understand that there is a calendar cycle where people live, and after a certain period, there is a whole generation of young people that come into line. Take, for example, 1975 till today's.
Chief MUSI, are you with us?
That is taking over Africa. There are mostly young people within the ages of...
Hopefully, okay, Your Majesty, please proceed. We lost you at some point, but please proceed.
I'm saying that if Doctor talked about a Jubilee cycle, and I want to share with him on that perspective, because if you look at the leaders that are taking over Africa, they are young people who fall within this age bracket of 40 to 50 years, and a little bit more than 50, which tells you that there are these young people who were born during the period of colonization. And they have grown of age, they have come of age, they have celebrated, they have seen the errors of their forefathers, and today they are sitting up to correct these mistakes. So I think this is just the Jubilee period for Africa to sit up, to be able to eradicate the errors of their forefathers or the errors of the past, to be able to have a more united Africa. And this, like you said, if some of these reforms that he outlined, if some of these reforms have to be implemented, I think we have to be very, very careful. First, not to only look at the aspects of, us trying to fight for reparation as Africans, but we should also be looking at things from the perspective of solidarity. Because if we push for the agenda of us taking back what we actually required from the West, without enforcing solidarity amongst us as African nations, we might end up having another in-house fighting, which might go a long way to break Africa than to solidify. And why I say so? I'm saying all this because if you look at the current trends across Africa, you'll realize that while the Sahel, for example, are building the Sahel bloc and going ahead, there are other structures who still believe under ECOWAS and who think they still need to stay under the colonized regime. So these are the issues. And if we have to make things work, looking at these continuous growing calls for Pan-Africanism, we should be looking at some of the things that actually could push for the reforms. I have a couple of ideas which I want to share with us on this program, which I think if solidarity has to exist across Africa, if we have to push for these growing concerns about us having a Pan-African structure which is based on economic reforms, we are looking at reparations when we are talking of economic reforms. And these reparations comes back in terms of what the West has to pay us for the things they did to us during colonization, and also using our own raw materials to be able to boost our different economies within the different African states. Now, if all of this has to be achieved, I would think that there are a couple of reforms which we must push for these reforms to be implemented across African states. I would name a few of them. I have like 7 reforms which I think if we have to push for a Pan-African structure and encourage African growth, solidarity, and economic empowerment, we should be looking at strengthening the African free trade area. It's very important for us to look at that. We need to be able to look at issues of financial integration, movement and cooperation within African nations. We must be able to look at resource sovereignty and the beneficiations for the African countries that we think have to push for these reforms for us to have a strong Pan-African institution. The third is we need to look at the aspects of industrialization and the addition of values for our different countries. We also must pay emphasis on food sovereignty. And this food sovereignty goes hand in glove with improving on agricultural structures and integrating agriculture as a very strong base for us to be able to move the agenda which we want to try. We want to create these reforms and build a strong economy for Africa. There is another aspect which I think it's an aspect which is important. The aspect of addressing our structural dependencies. If we have to push for a free trade or a free economy for Africa, we need to be able to build structures that can support our independent infrastructures in terms of the raw materials that we have. What do I have as a raw material as an African nation that I can exchange with the other African country to be able to create a leverage for us to have a balance and be able to live through our resources? And if we look at all of these 7 points that I've earmarked and see how these different points interwoven with the initiatives for pushing for an economic growth structure within Africa, and then we will be building a long-lasting and sustainable growth within African nations. Yes, so I think in my own perspective, it is important for us to understand that Africans have come of age. The time has come for us Africans to be able to sit up and collaborate within the different African countries and build these stronger structures. I think those are the points that I would probably also, in the course of this program, want to take a few of them and expatiate to be able to add my own little contribution towards the growing calls for Pan-Africanism.
Thank you, Your Majesty. But I would like to stay with you. You mentioned a point about resource sovereignty. I remember it's often said on the African continent that a divided house cannot stand. But yet again, Kwame Nkrumah pinpointed carefully that to achieve true independence, the continent must first of all seek economic independence. And now, with the 7 key points which you have highlighted so far, do you believe that Africa can truly achieve economic independence without tackling some of the issues that already exist on the African continent in terms of political unity and, or I would like to say, stability, which has to do with the security situation of Africa?
I think, Sharon, that's why I started by emphasizing on the issues of solidarity. Because if we don't have the mindset as Africans to be able to share our burdens, share our troubles with other African countries, we might end up just having all this whole thing mixed up. And yes, I think it is very possible for us to have these structural dependencies. And if this has to happen, we need to sit on the common table. I still feel that what I see across Africa as of now is that the mind of an ordinary African man like me and you, the minds are ready to embrace this growing trend of Pan-Africanism, this growing trend of Africa wanting to be on its own. Now we are looking at the leaders, and if 90% of most of Africans wants to go dependent, and then I think wants to go independent, I think it is incumbent of the people of African nations to be able to put into power or vote into power people that they think can rightly represent these aspirations that we have as Africans. Yes, I talked about structural dependencies, but if all these structures have to really work, there are certain things that we need to break down. There is the aspect of alternative financial mechanism. Does each country across Africa have the resources that can actually support their economy if they were left on their own? Because in terms of talking about a united Africa, it is very important for us to look at structures and how we can also be independent, because unity comes with what everyone brings on the table. And so you cannot come and bring something on the table when you are not able to provide what the other person needs. So I think in trying to look at all these points, this unity that we are advocating starts with dependency. And then there is an aspect of local currency settlement. If you look at the current financial situation across Africa, we are still embedded to the Western currency. We still trade in Western currency, and if we have to walk past this line, we have to look at a currency that has to keep us as Africans, that has to empower us Africans to be able to have a free trade area where we have our own finance, our own money that we can use in terms of trade. There is an aspect of diversified trade partners. You cannot build a strong economy without a relationship of diversity. You need partners, like I said, from different countries who offers something on the table. So this all goes back to us having partnership deals that can work for Africans, and then looking at the mistakes that the West brought on the table when they were negotiating during neo-colonialism. And the last point which I want to say that gives us this structural dependency is the aspect of strategic import substitution. It still takes us to the fact that if you have to build a strategic importation law, you need to be able to make an importation law across Africa where if I am importing from Mali and I'm in Cameroon, if I'm importing from Ghana and I want to export to Somalia or to Egypt, I should be able to have a strategic importation law that covers and that is binding for us as Africans. So to say it in a nutshell, we need to look at the mistakes that the West made as of the time they colonized Africa till date, and be able to correct these mistakes by building strong bridges that will keep us Africans as one another's keeper, while looking straight into the eyes of each and every African and believing in ourselves. And this can only be achieved if we have the rightful leaders in place who will sacrifice their blood and their neck for the development, for the growth of Africa, not the old leaders who have occupied the seats at the presidencies at the behest of the West.
Thank you immensely, Your Majesty, for that elaborate input. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're with us, this is Talking Points on 4U Media Africa, and we're having a conversation on ground in line with the growing calls for Pan-Africanism, unity, economic reforms, amongst others, on the African continent. Now, moving forward with you, Dr. NJIX, it's quite an interesting conversation. And of course, your co-panelists pinpointed a lot of points which needs to be taken into consideration as Africa moves towards, full emancipation in line with the calls for Pan-Africanism. From your approach, adding up to the points that have been enlisted so far, what role does youth activism, because you cited a couple of points earlier on that you said pushing for these calls for Pan-Africanism we're seeing on the African continent. In line with what your co-panelist just said, in sync with that, how are youth activism, just to borrow a lot of points from him, and the civil society playing a very crucial role in ensuring that we help revive the Pan-African ideals on the African continent?
Yeah, I will, before I address your question, if you allow me,
Sure.
I want to say a few things about what Chief MUSI said. You know, the ground principles that he mentioned, our leaders, starting from Nkrumah, Gamal Abdel Nasser, Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara, Rawlings, and Thabo Mbeki Mandela. You know, these are you know, the points. You know, all of them, people who care about Africa, who care about the sovereignty, the economic and political sovereignty of Africa.
True.
These are the points. You know, most of them have been talking about. So I agree with him. But I want to talk about something that is very particular, which is something that is happening in Africa. We saw the alliance of the Sahel states. There are three: Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. And then, based on what we've been observing, Togo seems to be having some sympathy, for the countries of the Sahel states. We also know that the Prime Minister of Senegal, Ousmane Sonko, was at the inaugural ceremony of the Thomas Sankara's mausoleum on May the 17th, 2025. We know also that Ghana seemed to have some sympathy for Burkina Faso and some other countries. So what I'm saying is that we have three countries of the Sahel states: Mali, Niger, Burkina, and we have Togo, we have Senegal, and then we have Ghana. 6 countries in the West African region, and then all of them are claiming Pan-Africanism, one way or the other. My point is that they need to show that they mean business. I know there are some reforms in Burkina Faso that we appreciate. We know that there are some reforms in Mali, in Niger. We appreciate that, but they need to go faster than that. It is very important. They don't have enough time. And then, as they want to try and give a blueprint of what can an African integrated development be, I'm going now to use the 2 expressions used by Chief MUSI: resource sovereignty and then food sovereignty. It is an aberration to know that Senegal, of course, Sonko and Bassirou, they just arrived, they came to power last year. Senegal imports, spends billions of CFA franc in order to import rice. And we know that one of the dishes that the Senegalese love very much is chep jen. We do that with rice. Based on the information that I got, they import rice. And it is an aberration that Togo also spends billions of CFA franc to import rice. It is an aberration that Ivory Coast, my country of origin, spends billions and hundreds of billions of CFA franc, for food or for rice. It does not make sense. So the countries that are talking about economic sovereignty and reparations, yes, we support them, but when they show that they mean something that need to work on it the next 2 years to see food sovereignty in those cities. If one country does not have the means to do food sovereignty in 1 year, now they have to show to us in the context of the Sahel states, people in Niger, they can feed the people in Burkina Faso, in Mali, or people in Ghana. And Ghana should stop importing frozen chicken from the United States. So, you know, there are so many aberrations on the continent of Africa. And then, like I said, that's why I mentioned those 6 countries. And I can go and talk about Zambia, that you were the president of Zambia, who was talking about neocolonialism. It is by developing food sovereignty, by developing resource sovereignty, by developing security sovereignty. Then, if you do that, then people know that you mean business. Thomas Sankara did it in 4 years. Kwame Nkrumah before him. Captain Ibrahim Traoré is trying to do that. We don't have all the data about what they're doing, but my point is that this is what we need to see beyond the speeches and the grandiose declarations that, you know, we've been hearing here and there. This is what we want to see in the next 2 years. If they do that, then we mean that we realize that they really mean business. Okay, there are things that they're trying. We appreciate. They need to go faster, stronger, and then it has to be done in the spirit of solidarity that Chief MUSI was talking about in the beginning of the show. Thanks.
Thank you to Dr. Nyaka. Back to you, Your Majesty. I saw you penning down a couple of points from what your co-panelist was stating. So do you share the same point of view as Dr. Nyaka?
Well, I think it's crucial for us at this point of this conversation to be very frank. I love the frankness of Dr. Nyaka because he made it very straight that there is no time. There is no time for us to realize this Pan-African dream. Let's not keep talking about this year, and then in the next 50 years again, we are celebrating another jubilee of us working on harmonizing our texts without any concrete actions. We have gone past fanfare. We have gone past this talking. I want to be sure that if I were in Mali, let me take the Sahel situation as an example. If I were in Mali, I want to be sure that with the free trade, with the collaboration within the Sahel states, I want to be sure before now, if they have been on the throne for 1, 2 years, 3 years, I want to be sure before this is enough time for a government. Because if you look at leadership across Africa, it spans from 2 years, 5 years to 5 years. And in Western democracy, they push it to 6, 7 years. But within an African structural democratic principle, it falls within 3 to 5 years of leadership. So if Traoré has been at the presidency for 2 years, I should be expecting that in the next 2 years or 3 years, he'll be marking 5 years there. And the need of the ordinary Burkinabe person is to see what, or be able to assess what Burkina Faso, their president Traoré, has done within his time in office, within 5 years. Just so, when it comes to 5 years, you should be able to organize this free and fair election so that if there is someone who wants to contest you as president, you should allow that person to be able to sit up and contest. Because the ideology of the Burkinabe people as of now is that they want development for Burkinabe. They want their country to grow. Every Burkinabe citizen wants the best for Burkina Faso. So let us not get to a situation where they keep delaying taking certain actions, Pan-African initiatives, and at the end of the day, their mandate runs out without them actually implementing something that does not only benefit an African country, but it benefits all the other collaborative nations across the Sahel. Let's not keep talking about the reforms of African heads of states through ECOWAS, West African heads of state. They go and sit in meetings, 5 years come and go, a president changes, another one comes, another 5 years. So, as Dr. Nyaka rightly said, let's move away from talking to action. I want to be sure that if I'm living in Mali and with the free trade that has been opened through the Sahel states, I need to see a Malian presently in Burkina Faso doing business and showing off as a resource, as an outcome from the free trade, from the collaboration of the Sahel states. I want to be able to see someone from Burkina Faso in Mali doing business and saying these are the outcomes of what we agree. I want to hear that if they are talking about a free currency, they should get to action and implement this currency, let it be functional, so that by the time Traore leaves the throne or leaves the presidency, there should be this continuity. We should not wait and after 5 years, they start saying they want him to stay again in power because he's doing the best for Burkina Faso. I think in as much as he is the best now for Burkina Faso, there is another Burkina Faso who could be far more better than Traore in years to come. So what am I saying? I'm just buttressing Dr. NJIX's point to say these African leaders should sit above just keep talking. I want to see a free trade passport for the Sahel states and people moving freely across the Sahel states to be able to show off for this collaboration that they are vying for. This is how it starts. And he mentioned Ghana, he mentioned these other countries that are Togo that are sympathizing with the Sahel. Yes, the sympathy they are sympathizing with is because their leaders also want to be sure that in letting go the West, what is it that if we were to follow the Pan-African dream, we will benefit from? So these are practical things that these heads of states need to propagate. They need to propel them, just so that every African nation keeps sympathizing. And before we know it, the 50-something countries that we have in Africa, we're already talking about maybe 30 that are supporting Pan-Africanism. It must not be about Sahel. It must not be about West. It must not be about the East. It must not be about the North. But it should be about people buying the dream. And if Traore and the other heads of state take upon themselves to accept that at any moment they can lose their life for fighting for a free Africa, and then they should be ready to prepare to be able to face what stands ahead of them. I think those are the rightful principles of a good leader. And we should take note, most of these achievements across these African countries is because of the current advantage they are taking over digitalization. The digital landscape, where information is easily shared through the media. I can sit in my office and do a TV program like this and all of this. So these are the benefits of digitalization. And if these things have to move faster, we must be able to have a digital platform in Africa where these African nations have an economic digital integration, where they can have a single digital market, they can have a Pan-African technology hub, they can have a data sovereignty policy for African countries, and of course, digital skill partnership where a young man can design a software that can be used across Africa and prove it to the world that it's working, and why not implement it? So I think these are some of the things we want to be raising here for a growing Pan-Africanism.
Thank you immensely, Your Majesty. Back to you, Dr. NJIX. Now, just picking up from there, you are based in the United States, but then you have an exposure of, an observation of different blocks that we have, the European Union, Asian, and so on and so forth. So from your perspective, being a Pan-Africanist, what lessons can Africa learn from, some of these other regions in the bid to where the continent is striving to pursue its economic integration and unity?
Okay.
Yeah, Dr. NJIX, please.
Question. Yes, of course. Yes. Yes. Can you hear me? Can you learn from the United States? We can learn from Europe. We can learn from Chinese, from the Japanese. We can learn from the BRICS. We can learn from Brazil. There are so many good examples. So, but as we know, the first thing that we need to do is, was talking about the imperative.
Dr. NJIX, are you still with us?
Seek first the political kingdom, and every else will come.
True.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Please proceed.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sure. Please
can you
proceed.
Hear me? Okay. Yeah. So, so then now there are so many good examples we can have in the world. but we need to promote political sovereignty. This is what we're seeing with the Sahel states. This is what we're seeing with Senegal. And then there are some fundamentals, some fundamental things to be done. And then the first thing, even before we learn the good examples across the globe, the first thing that I will suggest to those African leaders, it looks like they don't know much about Kwame Nkrumah. It looks like they don't know much about what others tried to do before them. So it looks like, for instance, in the case of Mali, they're doing many good things, but I have not heard them claiming the legacy of Modibo Keïta, who was the first president of Mali. In the case of Burkina Faso, thank God, Captain Traoré talks about Thomas Sankara's legacy. And maybe, that's why he's going a little bit faster than others. So my point is that we have to do the Sankofa process. We have to go back to the past. As I was talking about the Ubuntu philosophy, they have to go back and learn how Kwame Nkrumah tried to govern Ghana, how Modibo Keïta dealt with governance in Mali, and how many others. That's the first thing that they have to do. And when I'm observing them, when I'm listening to them, I don't see them doing that the way they should. I don't see that like a lot. That's the second thing. The third element is that when you want to do development, there are some key sectors. You were talking about the civil society. I will be talking about the civil society in a few. There are some key sectors. And one of the sectors that we have not spoken too much about, it is the sector of energy. So it is unbelievable. We cannot understand that Mali, Niger, Burkina, the sun is there, and then it looks like they are thinking about different ways in order to produce or to get energy. Solar power will be something very important in the Sahel states. And then now I'm talking about the burden is on those leaders, but is also on the BRICS nations. Because Russia is involved in the war, we can understand that. But what about China? I think that if China has been called upon to support the development of those countries, China is taking too much of its time in order to try and really help those countries have solar power in order to be able to sustain industrialization and development in those countries. So now, which is very important, is organizing the struggle. It is important in order to have like a cohort of patriots of different nations in Mali, Niger, Burkina, everywhere. But in the spirit of the implementation of the Ubuntu philosophy, in the spirit of the implementation of the Pan-African dream, that need to be transformed into a day-to-day vision that people need to embrace, support, and then activate, and then implement. It is important to think about a new system. And in this case, we'll be talking about the Ubuntu economy. We're not going to have enough time to talk about it, but we should know that it is about involvement, the involvement of different sectors of the society, which are going to put into place some economic units that they're going to manage, and through which they're going to try and feed themselves and feed others, and through which they're going to create some manufactured products that are going to be there for the needs of the people. And then I call that Ubuntu development communities, which will be the mode of production of the new Ubuntu economy that we will be promoting. In the case of Burkina Faso, they can claim Burkindi, which is the variant of Ubuntu in Burkina Faso. In the case of Senegal, they can claim NITE, that they use over there in everyday language, but they need to transform all those paradigms in economic terms. As they do that, what we see, the informal sector, people are going to be organized in order to try and produce food to feed themselves and in order to meet the needs, the biological needs of the people every day. Not everything has to be done by the state. So that is the type of conversation I'm not seeing in those countries in West Africa. So that will be my answer to your question.
Thank you immensely, Dr. NJIX. We're coming back to you. I like the initiative of the Ubuntu Development Community, Ubuntu Economy. We'll have time to dive into that, subsequently, but that's a very great one. Now, moving to Chief MUSI. We've had a conversation about the rich cultural diversity of the African continent, and on numerous occasions we keep on underlining that culture plays a very key role as far as the Pan-African dream, achieving the Pan-African dream in Africa is concerned. Now, from your perspective, because you're not just a Pan-Africanist, you're a traditional leader. From your perspective, from an Afrocentric perspective, how important is cultural unity, on the African continent in achieving Pan-African goals? And do you believe that Africa is really doing enough to promote this rich cultural diversity which it has on the African continent?
If I look at it from my background as a chief and from my own community,
His Royal Majesty,
I would say yes.
Okay, please can you
if I look at this from my own perspective as a chief and looking at my own community, I would say yes, we are propagating, we are talking about, we are defending our cultural value.
Mm-hmm.
I'll only be emphasizing that if things have to work for the interest of Africa, we cannot neglect the fact that we need to strengthen. It's not only about what works for me, it's about us strengthening this across Africa, and if it has to be strengthened, we have to look at where it works best and be able to apply or implement. Dr. Yaka talked about drawing experiences from the West, from Italy and other countries. Yes, you cannot generally just succeed without having a role model. You cannot really realize something without having someone you look up to. Even when a little boy starts playing football, there is this Etofis he wants to be like, There's this Messi, there's this Ronaldinho. So yes, cultural dependency. Yeah, our cultures in Africa, we can actually use them to propagate this idea of Pan-Africanism because initially Africa's strength was in their traditions. And these traditions were, the custodians of this tradition were their traditional rulers, for which I'm one of them. So they pay allegiance to me, and same like African has this strong cultural belief of believing in the ancestrals or in the ancestral line. So we have to be able, in trying to propagate this idea of Pan-Africanism, we have to preserve our rich cultures. I know at some point we'll talk about Christianity, how it came in and dissuaded what we were doing in Africa. But this is just an aspect of progress, an aspect of development, an aspect of human generational progress. But we cannot forget that all of this, if it has to be achieved, there is always, if you have to learn, you have to make mistakes in the course of learning. And you have to correct these mistakes as you grow across. So I think this is the right time. It is important for us to see our cultures as very unique and be able to push them. And before we run out of this show, it is important, Sharon, I highlight the fact that some of it's true that we are working towards a Pan-African dream, but there are some challenges that some nations that we are making. There are challenges that in the course of trying to vying for Pan-Africanism, we have not been able to meet up with these challenges or be able to have a resolve of how these challenges can be worked to be able to make Africa better. Dr. Yako also said in its interjection, in his contribution, that we, in the course of trying to be best, we need to be able to integrate different ideas from different people. There is this issue of national elite resistance. In some countries in Africa, while we are vying for Pan-Africanism, there are some political leaders that are prioritizing staying in power. These are some of the things that as Africans we must be looking at how to kick them out of power. There is an aspect of infrastructural deficit where there is a connectivity gap between countries. Why Cameroon is struggling to step up its digital landscape, Nigeria is stepping down, or Mali is stepping up, or Burkina Faso is stepping down. So there is this aspect of digital connectivity gap. We need to create an internet platform, a connectivity platform where we stay on the same level. Because don't get it wrong, most of these countries in the West are succeeding because they have good internet systems. They have good streaming systems to be able to meet up with the fourth generation or the fourth generation connectivity. So I don't see how in Africa we can be talking about these things without putting in place some of these amenities to be able to support the dream which we are vying for. One other thing is policy. The challenge we have with policies is that most countries have different economic policies. Either their finances are not the same, their financial growth rate is not the same, the standard of living for people of different countries are not the same. So we must be trying to moderate these things across Africa if we must have to seek for the best. And in resolving this, in resolving all of this, we need to implement strong Pan-African policies across most African countries that support this idea. And of course, develop transitional mechanisms. We need to take this very serious, transitional mechanisms to help vulnerable sectors adjust in their integration. If we continue to fight Pan-Africanism and have leaders sit on without having a transitional mechanism, we will find ourselves in a situation where a leader will do so well in 5 years, and by the time he's exiting, if they don't have a good transitional mechanism, all what was prepared in 5 years can be shattered. And let us not forget as Africans, this is a special message to the leaders across Africa, that in trying to build and propel this Pan-African dream by building sustainable and self-economic reforms across Africa, the West is also busy putting in place institutions, putting in place pressure groups, putting in place terrorist structures to be able to continue destabilizing our nations, so that in the course of growing, we now use these resources to fight back, as well as buying equipment from the West with the little resources we have. I know it would be far more better because we sold our raw materials for little less than 2,000% less, and it is important that we at this age we understand that in as much as we sold these resources at an amount less than what we had, it is important that we don't give room for the West to exploit us again. So instead, be careful as we deal with this. Thank you.
Thank you to Your Majesty. Let's just reiterate that you are contributing your capacity as a Pan-Africanist and a traditional leader. Well, like you said, it's time for Africa to actually pick up the baton of command, of course, to take the continent to a next level. Like you said, if Africa failed the first time, it is time for Africa to work on itself so it doesn't get into the same trap again. Now, to culminate this conversation, or to wrap up this conversation with you, Dr. NJIX, you earlier on mentioned that it's imperative for African leaders to go back in what you term the Sankofa process. I got that correct, where you said it's important for African leaders to learn from the founding fathers so they can be able to make the continent great, if I might use the word great again. Now, ultimately, being a Pan-Africanist to yourself, can Pan-Africanism and, you know, economic reform, this call for solidarity, more solidarity and unity on the African continent, succeed in Africa with the collaboration of grassroots supports and, of course, citizen participation? If I may add, Dr. NJIX, I don't know if you're with us. If I may add, you know, the way you're charting the way forward for the African continent.
Yeah, I had muted myself, sorry.
Okay.
So, yeah, so it's a very good question. It's a very good one. All of them are great. But I'm going to seize the opportunity to talk about something very important. You know, there was a time, and then people still do that. People like to complain about African leaders. You know, our leaders, you know, they're corrupt, they're not doing this, they're not doing that. Yes, you know, they're human beings. Exactly. We are not excusing them. We have denounced them. I have done that many times, even in this show. But one of the things that we have to understand is that the burden is on the leaders, but it is more on the masses, on the civil society. It is today when we see when people like me or many others who were fighting for Pan-Africanism for 20 or 30 years, there was a time people thought that we were sick, we were crazy. And then thanks to some historical factors, and thanks to the involvement of many groups of people in the Pan-African narrative, in the Pan-African vision, today we see that African leaders are adjusting. A country like Togo took the lead. Togo is not known as a traditional Pan-African nation, even though the first Togolese president, Sylvanus Olympio, was registered or recorded or known as a Pan-Africanist. But many years later, after he was taken out of power, we don't remember Togo claiming that Pan-African vision the way it is trying to do it today. Same thing in many other countries. What I'm saying is that there is an adjustment of the African political elite thanks to the struggles of many generations of Africans who claim Pan-Africanism. Today, Pan-Africanism is part of the pop culture. Today, Pan-Africanism is cherished, claimed by people who did not claim Pan-Africanism in the past. Why? Because of the struggles of all those masses, of all those people. In other words, the same way the contributions of generations and masses of Africans and people of African descent have led African leaders, you know, to adjust in order to claim Pan-Africanism, and we believe that they mean it. That is the same way we have to check by involved in the management of those perspectives. So we have here many things that are considered like some aberrations I was talking about. Rice that are importing. Same way, I can give an example. I was in Ghana. I wanted to open Eco Bank will not allow me to open an account. I don't have a passport from Ivory Coast. They say I don't live in Ghana, so they don't have an account. From Ivory Coast, from Ghana, you call Ivory Coast. You can have 4 CDs for 4 minutes, but with 4 CDs, you speak for 20 minutes. These are so many aberrations that we need to bring to our leaders, you know, so that they can make those fixes as they try to do those grand projects that we need in order for us to reconquer the economic sovereignty of Africa. So, yes, the role of the civil society and the people is very, very important. And even if the country, even the leaders do not want to organize their people, but that Ubuntu community development or the Ubuntu development communities need to put into place, be in places where people claim Ubuntu, or in the case of Burkina Faso, it can be the Burkindi community development. In Nigeria, the Mamudu community development. In Ghana, the Umpuntu community development. As we do that, like talking like a Chief MUSI, we will be claiming our cultures. We will be claiming a paradigm of our economic sovereignty, our cultural sovereignty, and we will be speaking with one voice and showing to the world that Africa is back. Thanks.
Africa is back indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, that is Dr. NJIX LAGOKE, founding member of the Convention for Pan-Africanism and Progress, Associate Professor of History at Lincoln University, United States. Thank you immensely, Dr. NJIX, for your insightful contribution to today's edition of Talking Point.
Thank you.
I equally say thank you immensely, Chief Musiwa, for taking out time to join us on this edition of the program. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's on that note that we shall be drawing down the curtains of today's edition of Talking Point over 4U Media Africa. You're watching us on 4U Television, listening to us over the airways of FM 96.3. We believe you learned a lot from today's exchange, but God willing, we'll see you next time. To have a great day in company of our numerous programs. Bye-bye.